Okay, we have an important discussion today. Terminology. Fake, counterfeit, proxy. You might hear these words used interchangeably, but they actually mean different things. So, in order to prevent confusion, let's go over what they mean a little bit, and hopefully we can get everyone on the right page, Okay, to start off with, before we go into all those, let's talk about authentic cards. Let's establish that first. So, authentic, real, legit, whatever you want to call it. So what is that? Let's define that. Okay, what that is an item that is officially made by the company who has the legal rights to make that item. That's about all there is to it. Now, whether they've released that item to the public is irrelevant. An item that they make and do not release is still a real item. So, test prints, any kind of pre-production thing, maybe something they intended to release and decided not to, canceled products, those items are still real. They just weren't released to the public. I mean, some companies make items that aren't intended for public consumption to start with. They're still making real items. Okay, now, in the case of cards, where you have third-party grading companies, some companies might not be okay with grading items that weren't released to the public. And that's fine, It takes a lot more work to authenticate something that wasn't released to the public. Okay, so how do you authenticate something that's real? Like, what's the baseline here? What are we trying to do? Okay, so in order to know whether something's real, the best thing that you can do is witness its creation yourself. I know most of us can't do that, but the Wizards of the Coast employees, some of them can do that, and the print facility workers, they can do that. Okay, so obviously if you saw the item made yourself, then you have a pretty good idea where it came from. You would know whether it's real or not. All right, next best thing. Let's assume that, you're not a Wizards of the Coast employee or a print facility worker, and so you have to go on to the next thing here. So, all right, the next thing you could do is find someone that was there. So you find someone else that did see its creation and can verify for you whether the item is real or not real. Preferably, you would find multiple people who saw the item's creation, or at least, were involved in some way, even if they didn't, witness it with their own eyes. Maybe they had a hand in creating it before sending it to the print facility. They're intimately familiar with the item enough to be able to say whether it's real or not. This is basically the way the news is supposed to work. A reporter goes and finds an eyewitness, gets the story, and then shares it with the public. Okay, so let's say that for some reason you can't find someone that actually witnessed the creation. Well, hold on a second. There's another good thing that we should discuss here, and that's provenance. Not providence, that's totally different. Provenance. So provenance is the history of ownership of the item from its origin to where it's currently at. So that involves the people who witnessed its creation, but it's also the people who have owned it since then. It's like a chain of custody. That's basically the way that artwork is authenticated. Provenance is pretty popular with artwork, with some other things too. Okay, so moving on to other ways to authenticate. Now we're getting further down the list. The earlier items were the preferred ways to authenticate. But on down the list, the next thing you could do if you don't have access to any of those first-hand sources, then you could compare the item to other items from the same production run. In the case of cards, it would be a print run because we're printing them. So if you're working with an item where multiple copies of the same item were made, then you could compare the item in question to other known real copies of the item. Now, it's very important that you be comparing the item to something from the same production run, because if you're comparing it to something from a different production run, something could have changed. It's a less reliable test. You know, things change over time. So in the case of magic cards, like let's say you're trying to authenticate an alpha magic card. You know, preferably you should be comparing it to another alpha magic card. Ideally, the same card name. Or at least the same color. You know, get as close as you can when you're making your comparison. You wouldn't want to compare it to, let's say, a French Mirrodin card, or something from a new set like Zendikar Rising or Commander Legends. An alpha card from, what is it now, 27 years ago, something like that, probably isn't going to look exactly the same as something that's brand new. So that's very important to compare to the same production run, or as close as you can get to make your test more reliable. Okay, so we've discussed what is a real item, and we've discussed how to tell whether it's real. Let's move on to the actual topic here. Okay, so what is a fake item? Now, a fake item is something that is not officially produced by the company who has the legal rights to make that item. So let's look at an example here. This right here, this is a Middle Ages sticker. I don't know if I can get the camera to focus on that or not. There we go. Okay, so a Middle Ages sticker. This is an item that was produced in '94, and a company made these to stick onto magic cards. So it's basically like a third-party magic card. This is not made by Wizards of the Coast. It's made by someone else to be played with Magic the Gathering. It's like another company making their own expansion set. Now, if they had made it on their own cards and made it a little more different from Magic, maybe they could have claimed it was their own game. But that's not what was happening. And so Wizards of the Coast, their lawyers contacted this company and basically shut them down. So it's fair to say this is a fake Magic card. Now, is it really a Magic card? It wasn't sold with the name Magic the Gathering. It was sold with the name Middle Ages. So it's a real Middle Ages card. But it's not a real Magic the Gathering card. So frame of reference is important. Now, just because it's not a real Magic the Gathering card doesn't mean that it's worthless. This is historically significant. It's one of the first card games that received that cease and desist and was shut down, which is kind of entertaining for collectors. So it's an interesting item. This particular one is one of the hardest cards to get in the set. And that's probably about it for this one. So, yeah, this was not made by the company who had the legal rights to make Magic the Gathering cards, and they were shut down. That's pretty much the definition of a fake card. Okay, so what else is a fake card? Check this one out. All right, this is obviously hand-drawn. So someone made this. This was a gift to me from a friend. It says Tavis Gator King. There we go. Yeah. All right, so hand-drawn card. Obviously not officially made by the company. Fake card, right? I mean, seems pretty obvious. Thank you again for the gift. I do appreciate this. Okay, let's look at another one. So here's another hand-drawn card. So Is this a fake card? Now, you'd kind of think so. I don't know if the camera will focus there, but this is a Keebler Elves. So, Keebler Elves, this is a 1997 World Championship card. So, these pre-constructed decks came with blanks like this. And the purpose was that you could make your own cards. So, this is a real card, right? It's being used for the intended purpose. Now, the ink isn't from Wizards of the Coast. Obviously, that's hand-created by someone. But the card itself, that's a real card. So you would call this altered. This is a real card that's been modified in some way. And we'll get into that some more in a minute. The updated version, Keebler Elves. I'll put scans in here if the camera won't focus right. So, okay, so Keebler Elves. This is a fake card. It wasn't produced by Wizards of the Coast with the intention of being made into a custom card by a fan. That's not what was going on here. So this is a fake card. It's nothing at all like a real card. I mean, sure, it uses some intellectual property like the mana costs and what it has a tap symbol, things like that, the general card frame, stuff like that. So it does use some copyrighted material. You could say that's copyright infringement to be using that material. And that's covered under the Wizards fan art policy. So if you want to make custom cards or something like that, make sure you read their fan art policy. It has all the guidelines on, what you need to do or not do. So here's some more fake cards. So these are things that just aren't real cards. We have Boom, Shimmering Telepathic, Altered Reality, Determination, Wish, and Mirkwood, obviously a Tolkien reference. So those are all examples of fake Magic cards. Are they counterfeits? No, they're not. They're fakes, and there's a difference. Okay, what is that difference? So the difference between a fake and a counterfeit is that a counterfeit is a fake that resembles the real thing. So these fakes, and this one, no one's really going to be fooled into thinking those are legit cards. Like, if you look them up in Oracle, that name doesn't exist. And they really don't look like real cards. I mean, if you know what you're looking at all. On top of that, there's, print quality issues and things like that. There's tons of ways to recognize that these aren't real cards. It's pretty obvious. Counterfeits, on the other hand, do resemble real cards, and someone could potentially be fooled. So, here's some counterfeits. Mox Emeralds. These are all counterfeit Mox Emeralds. So we have, this one is made on an inkjet printer, and this middle one's made on a laser jet printer, and this one is made on an offset printing press. So there's a lot of different ways to make counterfeit cards, and they look different, as you can imagine. But they are all counterfeit. And they look more or less like real cards. There's different qualities here. Some are better than others. But the point is that someone might actually be fooled into thinking that that's a real card. And that ability to be fooled is a problem. So with these fake cards, you have the issue of copyright infringement. Again, check with the fan art policy to see what you can and can't do. With the counterfeit cards, you have copyright infringement in addition to the potential for fraud. So now fraud is when you misrepresent something and, it's not what it's made out to be. Now, sure, you could totally be honest and say that, hey, these are counterfeits. And maybe you try to trade or sell or give or whatever them away honestly as counterfeits. They're still counterfeits, even if you're honest about it. The potential for fraud still exists. They could change hands again in the future, and that's part of the problem. So hopefully that gives you sort of an idea of the difference between a fake and a counterfeit. Counterfeits are fakes, but not all fakes are counterfeit. Some fakes are just fake. Okay, now let's go into proxy. Proxy is a commonly used term for counterfeit cards. But are proxies counterfeits? Not necessarily, not really. So what is a proxy? Okay, so a proxy is a card that is used in place of another card. But it actually doesn't even have to be a card. It can be any something that's used in place of another something. It's taking the place of another thing. So here's an example of a real card that is a proxy. Mox Pearl. Now, that's a real plains, but it's been scribbled on because someone wants to use it as a Mox Pearl. They've been nice enough to include the name and a crudely drawn rendition of the artwork and the casting cost, and the ability happens to be the exact same ability, so maybe they could have included the card type, but, whatever, you get the idea. It gives enough of an idea that you can play the game, and your opponent will know what this is supposed to represent, even though it's not actually that card. Now, you don't have to be that fancy when you're making a proxy. You could do something as simple as putting a card in your sleeved deck facing backwards. You could say that, I have this graded Samite Healer, and I want to play it in my deck. But I don't want to crack it open because this is a graded card. So what do? I'm going to proxy a Samite Healer, right? I mean, who wouldn't want to do that? So you build your deck, and it's sleeved because we use sleeves these days. And so you put one card in backwards, and you let your opponent know, hey, the backwards card is this Samite Healer. And maybe you keep this nearby when you're playing so that you can refer to its rules text when the card comes out. That'd be handy. We used to actually do that in tournaments back in the 90s. People had expensive cards. They didn't want the cards to get damaged by shuffling because we didn't really have sleeves back then. And so people would mark some other card, either with Sharpie or, something like that, and say, hey, this card that's totally the wrong color that doesn't match anything else in my deck is supposed to represent this other thing in a top loader. And we all understood what was going on. Okay, a little more fancy here. Proxies. Check that out. So this is a real artist-proof card, and the original artist for Mox Emerald drew this Mox Emerald on the back of the artist-proof. You could use that as a proxy for Mox Emerald. I think everyone would know what you were trying to do here. People would understand. Mox Emerald's a pretty iconic card. So that's pretty sweet. You could also hand draw it yourself if you wanted to. By the way, I have seen a full set of Richard Garfield altered basic lands that turned them into Moxes. So that was pretty awesome. Those are some proxies I'd be proud to play with. Okay, so the idea here is that these real cards can be used as proxies. A proxy is simply a card that's used in place of another card. So could these counterfeits be used as proxies? Sure, they could. It's only a proxy when you're using it as something else. So this fake Mox Emerald could be a proxy for a real Mox Emerald. For that matter, it could be a proxy for a basic forest or any other card. Just like you can modify a regular card to represent a different card, you could modify a fake card to represent a different card. Proxy simply means something being used to represent something else. Now, calling counterfeits proxies, especially when you're not in the middle of a game and it's not being used to represent something else, should be frowned on, because basically what you're doing at that point is you're trying to use a more acceptable word to describe your counterfeit. You're being a little bit dishonest. You're trying to avoid the counterfeit word. And, that's not really what you should be doing. Counterfeits might not be so good for the health of the game. On the other hand, proxies might be totally necessary, especially for some older formats, just for accessibility because the print runs were so low and for a variety of reasons. I didn't show this one yet, so here's another counterfeit. This is a non-foil expedition. Now, they didn't make any non-foil expeditions, so counterfeit. So, getting a little more complex here. Let's say you had some foil Power 9 cards. Now, foil cards didn't come out until 1998. Towards the end of 1998, there was one foil card for Magic, and no other ones were around until 1999. So before that, let's say you have some foil Power 9 cards. Are those counterfeits? Are they fakes? What do you call them? Well, so the deciding factor here is, can it be confused for the real thing? That's kind of going to be a judgment call. Maybe some new player might not know that foil cards didn't exist back then. Maybe they could be fooled, and in that case, sure, it's a counterfeit. On the other hand, most players will know that foil Power 9 cards are obviously not real, and in that case, you could call it a fake. So there's kind of a gray area there a little bit. Now, with something like this, even though foils don't exist, even though non-foils don't exist of expeditions, this is in an era where for most cards, they do have foil and non-foil versions. So this is way more likely to be confused by a new player. On top of that, the print quality is a lot better. Okay, some other unusual areas. Get into some more gray areas here. Let's look at let's talk about this one again for a minute. So this is the card that is a real card that is altered, so someone drew on it. I mean, that's basically what a proxy is, right? It's a card that's, in this case, someone drew on it, so it would represent a different card. Now, the difference here is that the Keebler Elves is a card that doesn't actually exist, whereas Mox Pearl is a card that exists. Okay, so this is an altered card. Here is another example of an altered card. So this is a real card back and a real card front, and they've been separated from their original other sides and adhered together. This is called rebacking. So this is a collector's edition Badlands, and it has a card back from a different card put on it. Now both sides are real, but they weren't originally stuck together. This is an alteration that's intended to deceive people into thinking that it's a real beta Badlands, but it's not. So, is it a fake? Is it altered? Again, that's a little bit of a gray area. It's certainly not a real beta card, but it is a real collector's edition card. So you got to be careful how you phrase it there. Yeah. Here is another example of a real item being misrepresented. Oh, yeah, one more thing I wanted to say here. I spaced it. So, this card does not have an issue with copyright infringement. Unlike the other counterfeits and fakes, there is no copyright infringement here because this is officially produced by the company. It just didn't look like this when they made it. But this is an issue for fraud still, because it can be misrepresented as something that it's not. And so you've got fakes, which are copyright infringement. You've got counterfeits, which are copyright infringement and potentially fraud. And then you have this altered card, Reback, which is not copyright infringement, but is potentially fraud. And so you've got different issues that you can come up against here. That's one of the reasons why terminology is important. All right, so back to this card. So this again is a real card, sort of. This is cut from a real sheet. It's officially made by the company. It's not rebacked or anything like that. However, it was not originally cut into this shape. So this is called an NFC, or not factory cut. Someone intentionally cut it into this incorrect, it's not really the incorrect shape because it's the correct shape for a card, but it's not cut where it's intended to be cut. But they cut it in the wrong place intentionally. And the idea here is typically to deceive someone into thinking that it's a miscut. But it's not really a miscut if you do it intentionally. So very similar to a reback, these are both altered legit items that are intended to deceive someone. It looks like a cool miscut, but it's not. So, as you can imagine, there's way more NFC, not factory cut, cards out there than there is actual, real, legit miscuts. Is that accurate? That might be accurate. I mean, legit miscuts have been happening for like 27 years. And in the early days, a lot were thrown away. NFC cards have been around for, let's say they've been ramping up for the past 11 years, which is a long time. When they show up 121 cards, a full sheet at a time, they quickly catch up with the previous years when there weren't so many being made. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there was more NFCs now than there were actual miscuts. When NFCs first came out, they were still valued pretty high, and interest has been falling off as more and more of them show up, especially since the Spark apology sheets were so widely distributed. Quick note on NFC cards again. So an NFC card doesn't have to be intentionally miscut. It could also be cut normally into regular card shape. So just keep that in mind. NFC just means not factory cut. It doesn't mean miscut. Okay, another unusual area here. Let's look at this card. Yeah. It's actually a tiny little card. Okay, so this card was made by a Wizards of the Coast employee, but not with the company's permission. He did show it to people at the company. You know, it was just a fun thing that he made. So, is that a real card? Is that a fake card? Well, that's the whole key here. This was not made with the company's permission. So that makes it a fake card. Now, it may have inspired the later creation of real items because people thought it was cool. You know, ideas have to start somewhere. And being an employee, he was connected. But the item itself is technically fake. Still pretty cool. Awesome item. Worth some money. Not a real card. Let's see. Here is another one. Don't see too many of these. Urza's Lawn Ornament. So this is an item made by a friend of a Wizards of the Coast employee, or several Wizards of the Coast employees. I believe they played poker together, so, you know, they hung out at game night. Is this a real item or a fake item? That's a little bit more of a gray area because of how early this was produced. It has a lot in common with the mini card here that was made without company permission. So the difference here is that some of these cards, sometimes they're called employee cards, even though the person who made this particular one, I don't think was an employee. It was a friend of an employee. But some of these early cards that happened like this did get published in the Wizards of the Coast God books. And that official acknowledgement as, you know, part of the set kind of makes them official cards, sort of. It'd be like having a licensed version of the card. Even though the company didn't make it themselves, they acknowledged it and said, you know, that's okay. Not distributed to the public. Now, this particular card, I don't know if this one appeared in the God book. I'd have to look that up. But some of them did appear in the God book. I think Proposal is one of those cards. So, Proposal, if you don't know the story, the creator of Magic the Gathering, Richard Garfield, originally proposed to his first wife by making a custom card. And I think that card did appear in a God book, and so it's an official card. Did he have permission from the company? As the largest shareholder, did he need permission from the company? Maybe he could give himself permission. So, you know, sometimes there's some gray areas. Important thing here is to be honest and, you know, try to figure out what's really going on so that you can describe it accurately. Okay, moving on, we're going to look at a couple more items here. We have a token. So this is a Card Kingdom Elf token. It's a 1/1. Well, it doesn't even say that it's a creature, but we can probably assume that it's a creature. So this is intended for use with the game, probably with Magic the Gathering. Maybe you could use it for some other games too. It's pretty generic. And so this doesn't really contain any information that would be copyright infringement. It's too generic for that. So, is it a fake? Not really. It's also not real because it's not an official item. I mean, it's a real Card Kingdom token, but it's not a real Magic card. This is what you would call an unofficial item, meaning that it's made for use with the game, but it doesn't contain any copyright infringement that would stop the company from making it. So Wizards of the Coast can't complain about this legally. Another example would be this worm token from Star City Games. Now this one's a little different. It says in the fine print down here at the bottom that Star City does have Wizards of the Coast permission to produce these. They're generic enough that that may not have been required, but Star City went ahead and got the permission anyway, just to cover all their bases. More likely, you'll find unofficial items that aren't cards. So this is a long box used for storing cards. It's decorative. This was intended for storing Magic cards. This is an unofficial third-party item, not made by Wizards of the Coast, but it is for use with Magic cards. No copyright infringement, no issues at all. Legally, this is just fine. Not fake, not counterfeit, just an unofficial item. This is one of the first decorative long boxes that they made. This was made by AEG, I believe in 1994, and they had a series of these, and some of them did feature artwork from Magic the Gathering artists. Later, Wizards of the Coast thought, hey, that's a great idea. We should make official ones of those, and they did. But before the official ones existed, we had unofficial ones. Okay, I think that about covers this topic. So just to recap here, a real item is one that is officially made by the company, regardless of whether they release it to the public. If the company made it, the company ordered its creation and had a hand in, doing that, or at least licensed someone to make it for them, then that's a real item. It's an official item. Even if it wasn't released to the public, it's still an official item. A fake is not officially made by the company. Usually it's made by someone else without the company's permission. A counterfeit is a fake that resembles the real thing. It's something that you could potentially confuse for the real thing. Usually they're made with the intention of deceiving someone. Now, that deceit doesn't have to be for monetary gain. It could also be for social gain. You could just be pretending to have something fancier than you actually have. That's still deceit. Okay, and the last one is a proxy, which is something that's used in place of another item. Whether it's a real card, or a fake card, or a counterfeit card, maybe it's not a card at all. Maybe it's a piece of paper. Who knows? All right, so there we go. Topic covered. I hope you learned something, and I hope that you use this information in your, daily life when you're talking about cards. If we all get on the same page and use the same terminology here, I think the community will really benefit from that. Okay, side topic here. So we have this card, Tavis Gator King. So, quick segue, side story here. Obviously, you've probably seen my alligator. This is an 11-foot long alligator, or was when he had the rest of his body. Let me introduce you to Frank. Okay. Frank is a big boy. Frank was 14 feet long, and he's pretty heavy, so I think I'm going to set him down soon. Frank starred in an independent film that I worked on called Hitikare, the Demon Gator of Persimmon Hollow, I believe it was. And so the plot line here, if I remember correctly, is that a undead alligator was terrorizing the countryside. That's a brief version. And the casting was brilliant. We actually found a dead alligator to play the undead alligator. So this is Frank, and I just thought I would have fun in introducing you all to Frank. So we worked together once, and he lives here. So, all right. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Leave me a comment or something. Catch you later.